first, before we get into the Q&A, just wanted to mention again that New Directors, New Films is supported by Film at Lincoln Center's New Wave membership program, and that Film at the Museum of Modern Art is made possible by Chanel with additional support provided by the annual Film Fund. I want to thank the film's distributor, Cinema Guild, for working with us. So thank you to Cinema Guild. So, okay, I'm joined once again by Fern Silva, now that you've all seen Rock Bottom Riser. Yeah, I mean, it's obviously like logical, I guess, to sort of start at the beginning and talk about the origins of the film. Fern, your work has often dealt with spaces, landscape, architecture, etc. Maybe could you tell us a bit about how you wound up filming in Hawaii, and maybe just tell us a bit about how the shooting and the research proceeded, because it's a film that's very compact and yet sprawling with a lot of ideas. So could you just sort of walk us through that a bit?
Yeah. Well, since this is my first feature, the process was a little bit more extensive. For about 10 years, I'd make a short film every year, at least one short film. And this one had taken at least 5 years, I think. But, you know, I arrived at this project, I think, well, I can't say that I arrived at the project in 2009. I started thinking about it. I think with all films, the process is very organic. It's not that I just think of one thing and I say, I'm going to make a film about it. You know, I have a concern. And so I was concerned about what was going on in 2009 when I heard about these protests, not knowing much about it, and then sort of digging into it consistently, and then realizing that this is something that I am really concerned about, partly because it is an example, if not the only example, when, you know, people have been able to stop corporate interests from taking over things that don't belong to them, or that, you know, that things that other people are concerned about. So I think in terms of the telescopes on Mauna Kea, and then also thinking about, in terms, you mentioned architecture, starting to think about them as these sort of colonial tools, not just as they are occupying the space, but that they're technically what they're doing is, or they have been doing is, and with this new telescope that is supposed to go up, that they're finding other Earth-like planets to potentially colonize. You know, that's kind of their main agenda, one of the main agendas, where everybody's sort of interested in trying to figure out. And some of the very first potentially habitable planets have been discovered with these telescopes. So already being interested in Polynesian navigation, or ancient Polynesian navigation, and thinking about, wondering why that hasn't been celebrated as much as it has, and why it's sort of Polynesian culture, at least in Hawaii, has sort of been, the attempt has been sort of, there's been this attempt of erasure. That all of these ideas sort of came together within the past, whatever, 10 years. And then that's how I pieced the film together. I think that the ancient Polynesian navigators, I think what they were able to do over 2,000 years ago, at least when they arrived in Hawaii, is something that, you know, I think I would say maybe one of the greatest human accomplishments in the history of our civilization. And so I think that was also another point to sort of dig in a little bit deeper, and the film sort of provided that space.
Yeah, and I think part of what forwards this sense of like how much is happening like intellectually, viscerally, and so on in the film is the kind of like the heterogeneity of its form. So I was wondering if we could just talk a bit about that. And I'm specifically, you know, there's very striking kind of like format mixing going on in the film, especially I think with these like telescopic, I guess they're probably telescopic images of like lava, of the lava flows and so on. So maybe could you just like I guess like on an aesthetic level, could you tell us a bit about this like diversity of forms, or like the heterogeneity of it?
Sure. I mean, I guess it's really, I mean, I could talk about this for days. I mean, there's so many layers. I mean, what I like about cinema is this sort of element of surprise. And that's what I try to do with this film as much as possible. And I do understand that it might be hard to catch some parts of it if you don't know that much about Hawaiian history. I think for me, it was just thinking about like the, thinking about Hawaii, sort of this world isolated in the middle of the Pacific, just like our planet in the universe, and thinking about its history of exploration and discovery in the past, present, and future, from the early Polynesian navigators to the Christian missionaries that made a massive impact, and to now with astronomy. So I think I kept on thinking about that in terms of the formal decisions and going back into the sort of cosmic space and back and forth. And then also like, obviously the lava is sort of constantly sort of creating is in itself is sort of like colonizing or creating space, or occupying space or taking over space. And so I think that was always the theme in my head of how to sort of navigate this film. It's just thinking about this sort of like entering, occupying the space and coming out of it and so on and so forth, and thinking about the ways that colonialism and imperialism operate. I don't know if that necessarily answers your question, but I mean, I think that we're on land and then we go into space and we come back down to Earth, and then we go underwater and we're back up. So I think it's just this sort of back and forth of just moving between, these different spaces. I think that's super articulate, but I think if you pick one little bit, then I could just, I could really.
Yeah, sure. Well,
you, so.
Yeah, I think the edit, like I wanted to ask about the editing, of course, because I think it's like, I think part of what we're talking about is also sort of like born of like the associative structure of the film, like sort of how you decide how do you decide to cut from one thing to the other, particularly when we're making these enormous like leaps, from like like lava flows to Alpha Centauri. So maybe we could zero in on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think that I think the shooting process is like, I was saying before, like the ideas when they're pieced together are pretty organic. I just won't start working on something unless all of these dots are connected. And I think, I do have these ideas when I'm going out to shoot, but then they're left very open. So if I don't feel comfortable, or somebody I'm shooting with doesn't feel comfortable, or if I'm not getting exactly what I'm intending to get, or rather just showing up and seeing what unfolds and being there and participating and witnessing, and then letting that sort of, in nature in itself, make those decisions. So I think, cutting between certain shots, let's say, for example, there's some that are just obvious, is that, we're at the beginning, one of the beginning shots is that helicopter shot of the lava river, and then we just cut straight to the street view, and then there's lava that's mowed over like a highway, and then we go into talking about Nainoa Thompson talking about the island, or speaking to the audience that this is my home, and so I think there are like, the point is to sort of create some sort of space, some pacing that then kind of like, I guess, will allow the viewer to sort of maybe consider what just happened beforehand. I don't know, that's also not like the most articulate way to describe it, but like each individual edit is so specific in terms of like the idea, the plans, or the intention, I guess. So I think it's sort of like watching the footage over and over and over again, seeing how many associations I can make with each edit, really, I guess, is what sort of like creates the cut. So I guess that's part of my process. I think it's also, like I said, it's really organic. So I'm sitting there and I'm watching. I'm trying to figure out what seems to fit at what time, so that we don't necessarily follow a narrative. I mean, the point is always to just do the complete opposite of what we might expect from like otherwise industrialized cinema, if that makes any sense. It took me all that time to just say that, like, I couldn't just say that right away. But really, I think it's always the point is to do the opposite, but then like somehow like create some sort of atmosphere. So people are just kind of being put, like the viewer is just sort of being pushed along and not really, without maybe realizing that they're following a narrative,
Yeah. Well, I mean, just one like particularly like striking kind of how to put one of the most striking like figures who's sort of floating around in the film and seems like becomes like a surprisingly big part of the kind of I don't know how to put it exactly. Maybe the kind of like imaginary of the film is, of course, Dwayne the Rock
Oh yeah.
Johnson,
Mhm.
and you know, uh, it might sound to people like we're who haven't seen the film like we're joking, but no, he's really quite important, I think, to what's happening to what's
Yeah, yeah.
happening in the film. And he's first mentioned in a what sounded like a recorded phone call, or like a perhaps radio. It was like a radio program. I'm not sure
Mhm.
exactly. And then he reappears on a hotel TV later, and So I'm just wondering, at what point did he kind of enter into your thinking, and whether like and I don't know, just like what role does like did he or like a figure like him sort of play in the kind of the way that you derived the sort of like how, I don't know, like the architecture of the film, so to speak.
Yeah, well, I think, well, first of all, I really love Dwayne The Rock Johnson. I'm a huge fan. I can't say that I totally relate to that level of masculinity that he exudes, but he seems like a really nice guy, and he's participated or has used his like celebrity status to participate in the with the protectors, keeping from keeping the telescope to go up. And so, although he doesn't really say much on the TV, at the end it seems a bit kind of a little bit empty, but he's just saying that nobody's going anywhere, and that in itself is important. Like I know sometimes these people are not, like the typical activist, but like he is there and he's making his presence known, and he's really proud of like his cultures, as he says, and he's also going to play King Kamehameha in this new Robert Zemeckis film, which is what is being talked about in that moment, which is then also kind of bounces back on my intentions, or sort of self-facing or self-aware way of me sort of like bouncing back as a foreigner shooting this film. So, I mean, I'm curious about what that means. I know that he's excited to play that role. And although some people are kind of thinking, well, he's not necessarily Hawaiian, he lived in Hawaii, but he's Polynesian. So there's that whole section that talks about that. So I think also, Dwayne The Rock Johnson has shot a lot of films in Hawaii. And I mean, like so many films, and he sort of pushes this into like the film industry in Hawaii. And so I think he just has this like semi-Hawaiian identity that I thought was fitting in terms of thinking about the landscape and thinking about inserting him into the film, not just because of the King Kamehameha thing, but because he's just become so, I don't know, so present in that movement, or or this Hawaiian identity. I mean, even in the beginning, you see like I've sort of affected this one moment where it's like this POV that's him himself. He comes back so many times throughout the film. And I mean, then there's the obviousness of his name being The Rock, that then sort of comes back to the film. So,
Yeah.
and his own personal narrative is sort of like, rising out of, like, maybe sort of difficult, difficult class struggle. So, yeah, I hope that answers that question a little bit.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah,
combination of things.
no, yeah, I got it. It's also, it's striking that even, if he like, yeah, because he opposes, I guess he opposes the construction of these telescopes. That's already like, that's perhaps more of a kind of like intentional sort of like activism like move for him. Whereas I think like over the last few years, when we've heard about him like wanting to run for president and so
Right.
on, he's like
Right.
adopted this the kind of the pose of like the pure cipher he's gonna split the difference between the left and the right because they both like
Right.
him, this kind of thing.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And then he spoke up about, because I think he was a registered Republican, and then he has switched over.
something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and then he backed, Biden and Harris. I know that he has like a gajillion followers on his social media. I don't have social media, but my friends always show me, and I'm always excited to see what he's saying or doing.
Yeah.
But so he has he definitely has this presence. So, and I think that in a way, him showing up and these other celebrities showing up over at Mauna Kea makes a difference. I mean, we all know that, even with Standing Rock is a great example, right? Where, people could hang on for as long as they can, and then just like and then like the government, or rather like the pipeline just did whatever it wanted to do. And so the fact that this has been going on for so long and they've been able to keep them from constructing the telescope, is incredible. Like, I mean, it's just such an incredible example of resistance that, like, as we all know, people follow, follow by example. And I think when this becomes more, since this has become a big international issue, there's a better chance that this preserved land will be protected. So so it's important that even somebody like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, who could potentially be losing, I don't know, things over taking this activist role, I think it's important that yeah, has a presence,
Yeah.
so to speak.
And another thing that sort of struck me in thinking about the film, and like, yeah, the role of these, the role that the sort of telescope construction, like the threat of this telescope construction, is that it's kind of, like now we're over a year into the COVID-19 pandemic, and this the eternal refrain is like, I believe in science, I trust science, and so on. But here, but I think here the film is like adding like perhaps a necessary wrinkle to that kind of thing. It's not so simple as just scientists are these like angelic figures, they so I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about maybe how you're, like, in the course of making the film, maybe how your thinking might have been might have changed or been informed by just sort of like focusing on this case. And yeah.
I mean, that's a great question, because it's something that I was thinking about nonstop. I can't say that was flip-flopping ideas, but it was just like, I was just taking in so much information and reading about so many things. It's not just about, the history of science on top of Mauna Kea, but also like just digging into diaries of like Captain Cook, who was first foreigner to arrive in Hawaii, to the diaries of the missionaries that arrived in like in 1820. And then also to Queen Liliuokalani in the late 1800s during the overthrow, and just and so on and so forth. So it's just learning a lot about all these things, and just thinking, and there's times where I've been just was so livid to learn about the overthrow, or truly the illegal occupation of Hawaii by the United States, and everything that they did in the late 1800s. So I don't know. I mean, I think there were moments where I thought, okay, well, maybe there's a few moments where I thought maybe it's okay to, maybe we wanted sort of, maybe it's okay to build this telescope, but then there's times where I'm like, absolutely not, considering like the attempts of erasure that have occurred for hundreds of years now, so I think that certainly swayed the decisions I wanted to make, like, for example, there are moments where you see this play or this performance. I mean, I learned how complex or how complicated Christianity had become in Hawaiian society. And I understood that it wasn't just black and white, that right off the bat, if you're sort of researching these things, people, even now when the film has been out, people are thinking, whoa, this is, the Native Hawaiians are against this. And it's just not just that. It's not just about, it's about the preservation of land, it's about the preservation of culture, but it's not just Native Hawaiians versus the telescopes. There are all sorts of people on all sides that are for and against it. Like, I've met Christians that are against it, and I've met haoles or foreigners that are against it, and Native Hawaiians who are for it because they don't want to rely on the economy of tourism anymore, and think that the astronomy economy is going to sort of help advance certain things and add to and other more opportunities. But it's tricky because people have been lied to so much. And even with the construction of, they're saying it's going to be this many stories when it was supposed to be a different, like less stories and take up less space and all of these things. It's just, it's been over and over, a lot of lying, a lot of attempts of erasure that then sort of make it even more complicated. So it is polarizing, as some people say in the film. It's a really polarizing issue, and it's something that people sometimes don't really want to talk about for that reason. So and there are also other people that are saying, or Native Hawaiians have said that that it's a part of the lineage, Hawaiian lineage, because of the early Polynesian navigators that have arrived by following as truly as astronomers, following the stars or mapping the stars to arrive in Hawaii, to travel to all these places in the Pacific. So I don't know if I went off the rails and if I answered your question.
You did. No, that was
by any
no,
means. So I think I just could keep on going on and on about it specifically, but I think the one thing that's hard to sort of grasp is the Christian influence. There's so much of it. There's also a lot of it in the film. There's that performance that's taking place by Moses Goods that is retelling the story of Pucahaya, whose memoirs really what launched the first New England missionaries. It was sort of back in the day, or back in 1817 or 1818 when it was published. It was like a small bestseller, and his story of his experience in Hawaii during this Hawaiian Civil War with Kamehameha and other chiefs on the Hawaiian Islands caused a lot of bloodshed, and he witnessed his family getting brutally murdered, and he left on a clipper ship and arrived in New England. And at that point, it was around the same time that the ABCFM started, the American Bureau of Commissioners for Foreign Missions, and he was in a school in Cornwall, Connecticut. And as he was writing his memoirs and telling the story, a lot of these Christian missionaries or Christians were compelled to want to go to Hawaii to save these otherwise what they would call heathens. And as he was dying, and Samuel Mills had edited his memoirs over there. And from there on, it wasn't just this Christianization of Hawaiians, but it was also, the sons of these missionaries were these plantation owners who then helped to overthrow the queen. So, and then that leads to this whole situation, which is like, generations and generations of attempted erasure. And then really in the 70s with the building of the Hokulea, which is the Polynesian canoe, that symbolized, having to prove that the Polynesians arrived in Hawaii. They had to sail back and forth to Tahiti, and that caused in itself sort of created this renaissance of Hawaiian culture. I'm like, there's so many things, and I'm like just throwing these things out at you.
No. But it occurred to me though that it, like I think like the erasure you're describing in a way has already been in large part like carried out. It's like ongoing, sure, but it's also been carried out, and like I feel like perhaps like people might be curious to. I mean, after seeing the film, people will doubtlessly be curious to learn more about these histories, etc. So actually, before we wrap up, we maybe do you have any are there resources that you recommend to people, like books, films, etc., that could, or is it really, do you think it's do you think it's best sort of pursued in this more lived kind of embodied way like you did with the film?
Well, I always think of, I think of films as, where I appreciate films, I think of films as points of inquiry, right? I hate being told exactly what to do and think, especially with these sort of formal devices that are implemented in narrative and documentary. So I always look at making films or watching films to then, like I said, be a point of inquiry so that I could sort of research. I think with this film, and the reason why I made it the way I did is because there is a lot of information out there. I mean, you could really just, Google something and then it'll be like a long list that you could dig into. So I don't, I'm not a historian. Obviously, I'm a filmmaker and an artist, but certainly interested in all these things. But there's a book that I feature in the film, The Nai no Hoku, which is by Rubelite Johnson. It was written by Rubelite Johnson, who's speaking over the star photographs. And then you see the book later on. That is that's an incredible book about it's Polynesian navigation and Polynesian Hawaiian history and star maps and formations and so on and so forth. So I would say that is my number one choice. But there's also, in terms of Hawaiian activism, and in terms of Hawaiian, American colonialism's impact on Hawaii. there's the books of Noi Silva that you could read. I don't know, that's another person that comes straight to mind. So yeah, I would hope. I'm glad that you said that, because I really do think that, like, I think I know that cinema does have this sort of imperialistic, like inheritant, and it's sort of inherently and sort of imperialistic in a way. So I think it's just sort of like creating some sort of like atmosphere and environment so that people could be invited in to then really be forced to question things. And I know that's hard for a lot of viewers to think, well, like, what the hell's going on here? But it's just like, that is the point, to sort of like, leave things open for your interpretation, but also like, allow a space for you to sort of want to explore further. So
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask one more, just one more question, which so we earlier we talked about about one rock, the rock, but now we're talking about the other rock in the film, the Paul Simon song.
yeah.
No, because I wanted to ask you about the about music in the film and how the music operates. It's like it ends up being, this very striking feature of the sound design, which is also quite complex, and we could probably talk about for a long time on its own right. But maybe could you like, can you tell us a little bit about some of the choices of the songs that appear in the film, and sort of how you see them operate? I know in one case it's like there's like a diegetic song that's actually being played in that classroom, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of those pop songs, or those songs that are in there, are being played in those spaces. So that's why they're there. Sergei Chirpinin did most of the score, and he was also one of the reasons why I made the film, because he'd been visiting family in on the Big Island of Hawaii for a long time. And I think even having conversations with him, I just started thinking, okay, this is a possibility. So we've collaborated multiple times, and so that there was a reason for that. I can't say exactly what, in terms of like the decisions that were being made. I just left them up to him. But also at the same time, a lot of the sounds from like the music or the score that's in the film are of natural sounds from the Big Island of Hawaii. So like the koki frogs are mixed with different birds and different natural sounds. So like they're all in there and synthesized in this really complex way. So like that's what that's all about. Even if one has a kind of like a weird, I mean, one of them so wild. I mean, it's like the overhead shot of the lava river. I mean, you hear like a reggaeton beat with some other beat with another, it's like it's just a mixture of like everything. And I think in a sense, like maybe that is implied with like this creation of land at the same time, which is sort of confused and chaotic. And then some of the other sound is also from this group called SETI X, that is a remix of the Golden Record. So that was sort of this astronomy connection in terms of like, sounds that were being used and pushed out into with the Voyager, as we all know, with the Golden Record. But that's all sort of remixed. So I think there's some of it is being taken from like this idea of this sort of chaos, in a sense, or how like there would be no cosmos without chaos. I think that was sort of like this idea around the sound design, and also with some of the original work of Leah Bertucci, which is all mostly wind instruments and natural sounds. So I don't know if that answers the question. Towards the end, you hear this really intense sound, which is, you see this sort of like dot going across the screen. That's Arcturus, which is Hawaii's zenith star, and that music that's there is a remix of sounds from the Golden Record. So people always ask what that is, and it's just like, yeah, that's remixed. So
yeah. Wow. Cool. I think we'll leave it there for now. But thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much for the film, and we'll probably see you in person relatively soon. Pandemic setbacks pending, of course. But yeah,
I hope so. Yeah, and thanks so much for your thoughtful questions. Sorry if I'm a bit scattered. It's a crazy time, so
No, they were very good. So yeah, thanks, Fern, and yeah, thank all of you for watching.
Yeah, thanks everybody.